Okay, hey Kelly. So, all right, we're gonna work on acid-base balance and understanding ABGs real quick. So I just threw this stuff together really fast. You were describing that they were teaching it with like the tic-tac-toe method, and I haven't heard of that method, but like any of those gimmicky little like learning things, they've never worked for me. Like they work for so many people, but they don't work for me. Like I cannot figure it out when people try to give me like their secret little trick. I can never figure it out. Like I just have to take it back to basics and like lay it out and memorize it and learn it that way. So this is how I do it. I hope it helps. Okay, so real quick, before you move on to like interpreting ABGs, there's the things you have to memorize, and you probably already have these things memorized, but we're going to start from the very beginning, okay? So first, our three pieces that we need to remember are our pH, our CO2, and our bicarb. All right, so your pH, and these you just have to commit these to memory, right? pH is 7.35 to 7.45, right? 7.35 and below, that's getting down to your more acidotic, okay? 7.45 above that, that's getting to your alkalotic, your more base, all right? So your acid below 7.35, your base above 7.45. CO2, and this one is, CO2 is measured in millimeters of mercury. So you have 35 to 45 millimeters of mercury. And the reason I have this backwards on here is because above 45, you're getting over to your acidosis, and below 35, you're getting over to your alkalosis, okay? So CO2 is 35 to 45, below 35, acidosis, above 45, or alkalosis, sorry, above 45, acidosis. All right, so it's backwards. It goes the opposite way that the pH goes. Bicarb, right? Milliequivalents per liter is how that's measured. That doesn't matter. But bicarb, 22 to 26. When you're below 22, that's your acidosis. Above 26, you're getting up to your alkalosis. Okay, so memorize those. pH 7.35 to 7.45. CO2 35 to 45. And bicarb is 22 to 26. Some hospitals, you'll see those numbers be like slightly fudged, like it'll be like, oh, 22 to 27 is normal, whatever, right? It's basically this. All right, and then we get over to golden rule I want you to remember. CO2 is an acid in your body. Bicarb is a base in your body, okay? So the more CO2 your body's hanging on to, the more acidotic it's gonna get. And when that starts to get acidotic, your body wants to do this beautiful thing where it tries to maintain that equilibrium, and it's going to release more bicarb from the kidneys to try to fix it, okay? So more CO2 is more acid, more bicarb is more base. And the opposite of that, less CO2 is more base, less bicarb is more acid. I hope that makes sense. All right, so there's three steps that we're gonna take when we interpret this. And I know I'm kind of running through this really fast. It's a video, you can go back. All right, so 3 steps. Step 1, you're going to look at, is my pH, right? Step 1, we look at our pH. Is this acid, right? Is this acidosis, or is this alkalosis? So that's step 1, that's the first question. Before you look at anything else, only look at that pH. You're not looking at the whole picture yet, okay? So you're gonna look at that pH only. Is this acidosis or is this alkalosis? Step 2, is this respiratory or is this metabolic, right? And where you get that, again, CO2 is respiratory, right? Because it comes from the lungs. Bicarb is metabolic because it comes from the kidneys, okay? So is it respiratory or is it metabolic? As in, if your pH is acidosis and your CO2 is also acidosis, then you know it's respiratory, right? Whichever one of these goes the right direction to match your pH, that's how you know it's your respiratory or metabolic. And then the third question is it compensated? Is it partially compensated? Or is it uncompensated? And that I want to talk about as we look at these questions, because I think it's a little easier to understand when you've got the numbers in front of you. Okay, so I want to leave this up. So I'm gonna I've got a piece of duct tape. All right, we got my hot pink duct tape. Hopefully you can see that. All right, dude. We're just gonna go right in to looking at a couple of these, okay? If you need to go back and review everything I just said again, do it. If you don't understand it, call me and we'll go through it again, okay? But that whole first part is basically just memorization. All right, so we got our first question here. Oh, I want another marker. We're gonna use hot pink since it's different. Okay, I think you should be able to see this pretty good. All right, so first question. Our pH is 7.02. So right off the bat, what is that? Is it acid? Is it base? Is this acidosis, alkalosis, or is it normal? Right? 7.02, we remember back here, is acidosis. So we're going to put a big old mark under acidosis. Okay? Right, so right off the bat, oh my gosh, sorry. All right, so right off the bat, we can go down here and we can answer number one. Is this acidosis or is this alkalosis? I don't even need to look at the rest of it. And this is acidosis, okay? All right, number two, I'm gonna look at my CO2, right? We need to know, is this respiratory or is this metabolic? My CO2, 68. Is 68 acidosis or is 68 alkalosis? Right, CO2 goes these opposite direction. Remember, high CO2 is high acid, low CO2 is more base, right? So this is high, so we know that this is acidosis. Before I even move on, I already know that this is a respiratory acidosis, right? Because CO2 comes from the lungs. So this is respiratory acidosis, okay? The next thing I need to know is this compensated? Is this partially compensated? Or is this uncompensated? And the way we're gonna do that is we're gonna look at our bicarb, right? Because we already know it's respiratory. We're gonna look at our bicarb. All right, our bicarb is 26, right? 26. So we know our normal bicarb is 22 to 26. So is this acidosis, is this alkalosis, or is this normal? And in this situation, the bicarb is normal, right? So normal. So the question is it compensated? Is it partially compensated? Or is it uncompensated? In order for the bicarb to compensate for this, it would have to go the opposite direction. So the CO2 has gone to acidosis. If our bicarb were becoming more alkalosis, then it would be getting to trying to compensate. But it's not even moving out of that range yet, right? It's getting there, but it's not moving out of that range yet. So in this situation, this is okay? So we've answered three questions. 1, acidosis or alkalosis. 2, respiratory or metabolic. 3, compensated, partially compensated, or uncompensated. And now, to give you like the full laid out answer, you go back and you go 3, 2, 1. This is uncompensated respiratory acidosis, okay? Uncompensated respiratory acidosis. Let's move on. All right, I've got like 6 of these, I think. Okay, so 2, right? We're not even looking here yet, okay? We're just gonna look at our pH. So our pH is 7.1. Is that acidosis? Is that alkalosis? Or is that normal? Okay, so 7.1, that's acidosis. All right, let's look at our CO2. 70. Our normal is 35 to 45. 70 is well out of the range. Is that in the acidosis range, the alkalosis range, we already know it's not normal, right? So CO2, more CO2 is more acid. CO2 is an acid, right? So this is acidosis, okay? So let's look at question 1 and question 2 before we do 3. So 1, is it acidosis or alkalosis? We already said this is acidosis. The CO2 is acidotic, right? The CO2 is an acid, the pH is an acid. So CO2 is respiratory, it's respiratory. All right, now, is this compensated, partially compensated, or uncompensated? The bicarb is 30. So we know that our normal range for bicarb is 22 to 26, right? This is outside that range, it's not normal, okay? Is 30 alkalosis or is 30 acidosis? Remember, bicarb is a base. So more bicarb is more base, which means that this is alkalosis, okay? All right, so the body's trying to compensate, right? The body said, okay, we've got an acidotic situation here. The lungs aren't doing their job right. We need to help them out, right? So the kidneys said, here, I'm gonna release some more bicarb, right? To try to help level out the situation, to try to bring things back to more alkalotic state, to bring our pH up. But has it gotten the pH up yet? It's working on it, right? So it's not uncompensated, right? The bicarb has to be normal for it to be uncompensated. So it's trying, right? It's not fully compensated because for it to be fully compensated, our pH would have had to go to normal by now. So what we have is a partially, right? This is a partial compensation. Okay, so we answered 1, 2, 3. Now 3, 2, 1, this is a partially compensated respiratory acidosis. Okay, partially compensated respiratory acidosis. All right, let's go to the next one. It's not that one, it's this one. Okay. All right, girls, so we got pH 7.35. What is normal? 7.35 to 7.45, right? So 7.35 is normal. So is it acidosis or alkalosis? We're gonna skip that for a second, right? We're gonna skip it for a second. Number 2, is it respiratory or metabolic? Well, let's look at this. Let's look at the CO2. Is that acidosis or alkalosis? CO2, 35 to 45. This is 56. So more CO2 is more acid, acidosis. Okay. Let's look at our bicarb, right? 22 to 26, more bicarb is a base, so that's alkalosis, okay? So let's go back to question 1. Is this acidosis or alkalosis? 7.35 to 7.45. This is a normal range, but it's more on the acidotic side, right? So like 7.4 being right dead center, okay, dead center of normal. Anything towards 7.35 to like 7.399, right, is going to be more acidotic. Anything towards 7.45 is going to be more alkalotic, right? So this is 7.35. So this is moving towards acidosis. So we're going to call it acidosis. CO2 matches it. So it's respiratory. And remember earlier we said the pH has to be normal for it to be considered fully compensated. So this is a fully compensated. So 3, 2, 1, this is fully compensated respiratory acidosis. Fully compensated because the pH is normal. If the pH were 1 point lower, like 7.34, it would still just be considered partially compensated because it's getting there, but it doesn't have it back in that window yet. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm hyper explaining stuff because I'm hoping it helps. I hope. All right, number 4. We're changing it up a little bit, right? Okay, our pH is 7.5. Normal is 7.35 to 7.45. So is this acidosis, alkalosis? It's alkalosis. Okay, we're gonna look at our CO2, right? Our CO2 is 40. Normal's 35 to 45, so already our CO2 is normal, right? Oh, so I skipped this. pH, alkalose, so we know this is alkalosis. Our CO2 is 40, so that's normal, so I'm thinking this is probably not respiratory, right? Let's look at our bicarb. Normal is 22 to 26. More bicarb is more base. This is alkalosis. So our bicarb matches our pH, making this metabolic because it comes from the kidneys, right? So it's metabolic. All right. So we already know this is a metabolic alkalosis, right? Now is it compensated, partially compensated, or uncompensated, right? And what we've got here is CO2 still is normal, right? So first off, we know pH is in normal range, so it can't be fully compensated, right? CO2 hasn't moved out of its normal, so it's not partially compensated. The body's not trying to compensate at all, right? So uncompensated. So we have an uncompensated metabolic alkalosis. Uncompensated metabolic alkalosis. All right, 2 more, and I hope you feel better. Otis, are you serious? Why are you mad? Hang on, Otis is really mad about something. Otis, why are you mad? What's wrong? What's wrong? She did nothing to you. Did she like sit on your tail? Are you good? Okay, we're fine. We're fine. Now we're playing. Everything's great. All right, last 2. Okay, we have a pH of 7.48. 7.48 is the acidosis or alkalosis. It's alkalosis, right? So 7.48 is above 7.45, so that's alkalosis. CO2 is 50. 35 to 45 is our normal, right? More CO2, remember CO2 is an acid, that's an acidosis. All right, so our CO2 and our pH don't match, so it's not respiratory, right? Bicarb, 35, our normal is 22 to 26, more bicarb, more base, so alkalosis. So this is alkalosis, right? Bicarb matches it, so it's metabolic, right? So we've got a metabolic alkalosis. Is this fully compensated? Well, we know it's not fully compensated because the pH is still outside the norm. So it's not fully compensated, right? Is it uncompensated? No, it's not, because the CO2 is moving the opposite direction. It's trying to help. So it's not uncompensated, all right? The CO2 is trying to help, which means it's partial, right? So we have partially compensated metabolic alkalosis, right? Partially compensated metabolic alkalosis. All right, last one. I move faster. Okay, pH is 7.45. Normal, right? 7.45. 7.35 to 7.45, that's normal, okay? So, is it more on the acid side of normal or more on the base side of normal, right? It's more on the base side of normal. So we're gonna call this alkalosis, okay? CO2 is 50. Is that more acid or more base? More CO2, more acid, right? So CO2 is high, so it's acid. Bicarb is 33. 22 to 26 is normal. More bicarb, more base. So this is alkalosis, okay? So we said the pH, even though it's normal, it's closer to being alkalosis, right? So this is alkalosis. So which one of these is alkalosis? It's bicarb, right? So it's metabolic. And then, is this fully compensated? Yes, right? Because we already see the CO2 is trying to help out. It's moving in the opposite direction. But the pH is within normal limits, right? So we have fully compensated, right? So we have a compensated metabolic alkalosis, all right? I can do a lot more of these. We can just sit down and go over it, and you can ask every single question you have. But this is just what I had lying around. Had some recycling on the front porch, so now you've got those. So I hope this helps. Let me know if you need more help. Okay, bye.